everyone, this is People in Power and I'm Summer El-Shahat. On today's programme, secrets and children.
I don't understand why they have to hide, what is the big problem in allowing what we're asking for, As I said, we're not keeping any secrets, there's no secrets on their behalf. If they done everything by the book for Daniel, what is the big secret?
In recent years, Ireland has gained worldwide notoriety for the child abuse that took place across the country in religious institutions and parishes. These horrifying abuses were documented in 2 reports from the Murphy and Ryan inquiries in 2009 and covered in a People in Power report on the subject earlier this year. Unfortunately, Irish children may still be at risk. Only this time, the problems don't stem from the clergy. As Sinead O'Shea has been finding out, the country's state-run childcare services are also now being accused of neglecting youngsters for whom they have responsibility.
Ireland was rocked in 2009 by the publication of 2 reports into the abuse of children by Ireland's Roman Catholic clergy. The Irish Prime Minister, our Taoiseach, acknowledged the shock and shame that many felt.
On behalf of the state and of all citizens of the state, the government wishes to make a sincere and long overdue apology to the victims of childhood abuse for our collective failure to intervene, to detect their pain, or to come to their rescue.
The Taoiseach made a speech in the Dáil in which he said that in his view, the only possible response to those reports was to make Ireland a model of best practice where children are concerned. A year down the line, we've made very, very little progress. And what that proves, if it proves nothing else, is that we're really, really good on policy where children are concerned, and we're awful at implementation.
It's a matter of civic responsibility, it's a matter of political responsibility, and it's a matter of state responsibility that we provide mechanisms, and we provide systems, and we provide, most importantly, people to whom children can go.
This is a story of mismanagement, malpractice and cover-up. A story of the neglect of some of Ireland's most vulnerable people.
Care of vulnerable children in Ireland is the responsibility of the Health Services Executive, or HSE. It's a state-run organisation responsible for all of Ireland's hospitals and for the delivery of social services across the country. It pledges to promote positive and enduring changes in the lives of children and families, and that its social workers respond to children who are not receiving adequate care and protection. But many in Ireland now feel that the HSE is failing in these responsibilities, failings which were clearly demonstrated earlier this year when questions were asked in Ireland's Parliament. Alan Shatter is a family lawyer and an opposition MP.
I was essentially looking for 2 pieces of information. The first was the number of children who had died in the care of the state during the preceding 10 years. And secondly, the number of children reported to our social services as being at risk, who had subsequently died.
The response was confusing, to say the least. On March the 4th, the HSE announced that of the 5,000 children that had been in its care over the last 10 years, 20 had died. But many believe that this wasn't the real number, and pressure increased on the organisation. On May 28th, the HSE announced that 37 children had died in its care. Finally, on June 4th, the total number is announced. 188 children had died in their care.
I find it extraordinary that the Health Service Executive were not able to procure figures.
Catherine Gent is a family lawyer who deals with the HSE on a regular basis.
I mean, it is something that you would think would be so serious that you would automatically be able to say, this is our folder, this is what we have, and I mean, that is extraordinary that they were not able to put their hands on the figures right away.
After a year and a half of looking for that information, I still don't know, is that figure accurate, and I suspect it isn't. But when it came to the number of children reported to be at risk who died, there's no information yet published.
But the HSE's reluctance to share information came as no surprise to the family of Daniel McAnaspey. He was one of the 188 who had died while in the agency's care.
He was basically staying everywhere and anywhere. Anywhere he could get a bed, he was staying. He was going into police stations at 8 o'clock at night. They were putting him in all sorts of places. He had rang me one night at 2 o'clock in the morning. He was after being beaten up. He was in the middle of O'Connell Street, literally terrified.
Life had been very difficult for Daniel and his family. His father died when he was 3. When he was 10, he, his mother and 4 of his siblings received help from social services. Soon after, their mother sought treatment for alcoholism. She was not allowed back into the home.
I went down from there. They started running wild. You know, Daniel just started going off the rail big time. Daniel was really close to his mum, really, really close. So he kind of felt it a little bit more than the others. They'd be out at all hours. We'd get phone calls at all hours in the morning, you know. The girls are not here, the boys are not here. You know, can you come down and put them to bed? They won't go to bed, you know, but still we were being told we weren't good enough to take them.
But despite this, Sabrina did offer to bring up Daniel and the other children, but their care was taken over by the HSC. The family found the agency difficult to deal with.
You'll phone and you'll ask for such a person, and that person's not there. That person will get back to you. Or else it would be, oh, we'll look into that. Oh, that's a good idea, we'll look into that. You'll never hear it unless you bring it up again, you know. And if you're a person that doesn't know the system or doesn't know anything about the system, you know, you're going to sit back and wait for these people because you're trusting these people.
The family don't believe that Daniel and his siblings received appropriate care.
They let it go on until it totally went out of control. You know, they let it go on. They didn't nip it when it should have been nipped. They needed counselling for themselves, you know. Daniel needed a psychiatrist.
Over the years, Daniel passed through 20 different placements in care homes. Sometimes, his family say, he even stayed overnight in police stations. Despite this, the HSC told his relatives that Daniel was not wild enough to receive more secure care.
They said he didn't fit. He wasn't, how do I describe the word? He didn't fit the criteria. He wasn't self-harming and he wasn't harming people.
And then in February this year, Daniel went missing.
It is still not clear what happened to Daniel on that night of February 25th. What is known is that he left his temporary accommodation and went out. There appears to have been a fight. Days later, his body was found in a ditch on a farm more than 30 kilometres away. He'd been stabbed 6 times.
Deep down, I knew it was going to be Daniel anyways, but to actually hear it was him, it was like a shock as well. But I knew, like, I think I was still kind of hoping I wasn't. But it was so hard, like, to find out that your brother was after being murdered and left.
Did you feel that you got enough help from the HSC afterwards?
They haven't been in contact with me, any of my family members, since we have found Daniel and buried Daniel. They haven't rang us to see if we're okay, do we need anything. No support whatsoever.
The McAnaspey family now want to see Daniel's HSC records. So far, the agency has declined their requests.
I don't understand why they have to hide. You know, what is the big problem in allowing what we're asking for? You know, as I said, we're not keeping any secrets. You know, there's no secrets on their behalf. You know, if they done everything by the book for Daniel, what is the big secret?
There's an obsessive, obscene level of secrecy which is utterly contrary to the public interest and which is trotted out with great regularity by spokespersons on behalf of the HSE as if they're doing children a service, when in fact they're doing not just children a disservice, but they're acting contrary to the public interest. And unfortunately, the government and successive ministers for children have been complicit in accepting that approach.
Fergus Finlay agrees. He is the head of children's charity Bernardo's.
Unfortunately, a defensive culture, which has become almost a culture of secrecy, has surrounded an awful lot of these issues. It's defended by the HSE on the basis that you know, the interests of the child must be protected by preserving the confidentiality of the child. But that's not actually an argument that holds any water, because nobody wants to know the identity of children. What people want to know is what's happening to children, how well are care plans working.
According to the HSC's own figures, Daniel McAnaspey was only one of 188 children and young people who have died while officially under its care. Young people like Danny Talbot, a 19-year-old whose behaviour began to deteriorate after being placed in foster care at the age of 9. He eventually died of a drug overdose at 19. Or Michelle Bray, a 14-year-old who died after inhaling the contents of a deodorant can. The HSC had been warned a year earlier that her life was in danger unless she was put into residential care. Or 19-year-old Tracy Fay, who died of a drug overdose while in HSC care. The agency's own internal report admitted failures, including not providing appropriate addiction support. But it took 8 years for this report to become public, and only then when it was released by MP Alan Shatter of the Fine Gael party.
When it became quite clear it wasn't going to be published, we took the view in Fine Gael that it was in the public interest that we published it. The HSE is obsessed by secrecy, which goes way beyond protecting the confidentiality of families. There's basically a cover-up mentality, and the manner in which they dealt with the Tracy Fay report starkly illustrates that.
The HSE, I think, has got into a situation now where it feels under siege most of the time. It feels it's dealing with crisis, and they feel the only response to that is to be as secretive as they can possibly be. And that's a disaster. It's a disaster for them, it's a disaster for children, and it's a disaster for the development of a better system.
If that system has a cutting edge, it's here. Ballydowd is one of Ireland's secure care facilities for children with serious emotional and behavioural problems. Undoubtedly, the cases it deals with are among the most challenging, but we've been told some disturbing stories about the care of children here. We can't report much of what we've heard, and staff are reluctant to talk openly. But 2 former employees were willing to share their experiences.
The young people, by and large, I think, did benefit from Ballydowd at a very basic level, and in terms that it did manage to keep them safe while they were resident in Ballydowd. But we did deal with a number of young people who were probably, in fairness, beyond our abilities as care staff to be able to work with them effectively. And that's, for me, where the difficulty lay, in linking those young people in with the more, with other services such as psychiatric services, speech and language therapy and stuff like that.
Another former employee who left Ballydowd last year was concerned about the worsening relationship between management and staff. He asked us not to reveal his identity.
I put it on record that I left because of the lack of trust I had in management and the lack of trust of accountability and transparency within that facility.
One of his major anxieties was about the accuracy of case reports on children given to their social workers by the unit's senior management. This information could be critical in deciding the child's long-term care and the length of their stay at Ballydowd. One particular case, which other former staff also told us about off-camera, concerned a child who was displaying inappropriate sexual behaviours.
Staff assessed the behaviours and felt that these behaviours were not normal and they were not appropriate, and then did up reports on that in relation to that matter. And when these fears were written down and the report was handed to management, that it was brought to the staff team at a team meeting, and the people who wrote the report were told they were demonising children and playing right into social workers' hands.
And why do you think that report wasn't taken seriously?
Because the child was in Ballydowd for so long, is that if these behaviours came to light, that they would have to keep them longer. 2 or 3 weeks later, there was serious allegations against that child for displaying sexualised behaviours on another child.
Staff say this was part of a wider pattern where management controlled all information, even when that information might have had a critical bearing on a child's future care.
There was a memo sent down to the staff not to speak to social workers. You know, that in social care field, that would not be it. That would not be the channel of communication. Like, if you key work a child, you would have the right to talk to a social worker about that child, but that communication was stopped and all communication had to go through management.
This is in stark contrast to the HSC mission statement that says, social workers respond to children who are not receiving adequate care and protection.
And that only highlighted then to staff that when they seen copies that were sent out to social workers, they weren't the copies that were written by the staff members. So they were altered, they were changed to water down behaviours.
The management's determination to control information and to marginalise some social workers was made very clear.
Social workers who would demand that the children aren't ready to move on, they were the social workers that would be called the bitches, they'd be the social workers that would be told, the children would be told, don't listen to them, I'll get you out of here.
This apparent culture of secrecy was exposed by a disturbing incident at Ballydowd on February 4th, 2009. Nick Butler, who left in 2006 but still keeps in touch with the staff on the unit, was told of the affair.
A young person within Ballydowd was refusing to get out of bed and go to school. The Director of Services was informed that the young girl still hadn't got out of bed 10 minutes later, so she went down to the unit, followed by staff and by the other young people resident in the unit at the time, took the fire hose out and put it through the viewing panel. During this, the other young people were becoming highly excitable and were goading the Director of Services to actually follow through on their actions, which she did. She sprayed the fire hose. My information is it was in excess of a minute of full force at this young person.
Nick Butler alleges that the manager concerned then sought to cover her tracks.
She immediately went down to the staff office, rang the mother of this child and gained permission retrospectively for what she had just done. Apparently she told the mother that the young girl was refusing to get out of bed. Could she have permission to turn the hose on her and just soak her feet a little bit? And the permission was granted, even though the incident had already happened at that point.
The child, helped by 2 members of staff, later complained to the police about the incident. We understand those 2 employees were subsequently suspended for 16 weeks without being told why. We've also been told that senior managers then tried to get the girl to retract her complaint.
I remember being called, being summoned out of a room when I was watching TV with the child and being told that we needed to have a private conversation with this child. Now, I left the room, which I regret leaving now in hindsight, and I waited in the corridor. And then I could just hear the child screaming and crying, and I went back in. And with that, the child then said, they're trying to get me to change my story. They're trying to get me to drop the charges. They have said to me, if I don't drop the charges, that they are going to press charges against me and get me a stint in Oberstown, which is a lockup for teenagers.
Eventually, this matter and numerous other complaints were brought to the attention of HSE officials. People in Power has obtained a letter dated May 29, 2009 from the agency's then Director of Childcare, Hugh Kane, to the Ballydowd manager at the heart of the affair. He wrote that an investigation had ruled that the anonymous allegations against her were unfounded, malicious in nature and without any substance. He sent copies to all the care staff in the unit. In November 2009, HICWA, a regulatory body charged with oversight of the HSE, published a report which noted that there were serious difficulties of trust between management and staff at Ballydowd, which impacted negatively in the unit. It also criticised the physical state of the building, which is just 10 years old, and recommended that the unit be shut down. Although it referred obliquely to the fire hosing incident, it had no mandate to investigate it. Despite HICWA's recommendations and the HSE's promises, the unit is still open. In the interim, the fire hose incident is being pursued with the prosecuting authorities.
What occurred with regard to Ballydowd is just yet another example of the dysfunction of our childcare services and the extent to which the HSE has failed to apply the approach necessary to deal with individual children's problems on an individualised basis.
We approached the HSE in July for a response to the concerns raised by this film and have repeated our requests on a number of occasions. The agency has yet to reply. We aren't alone. Ireland's independent ombudsman, Emily O'Reilly, has also had problems communicating with the HSE. In July, she published a damning account of her attempts to deal with complaints about the agency made by the public. She described the process as frustrating, wasteful, dispiriting, and ultimately useless. Anxiety about another aspect of the HSE's childcare programme has recently begun to surface, following an admission by the agency that it had no idea as to the status or whereabouts of some children it had placed with foster parents.
I mean, in one of the areas, the health service executive were unable to give details as to 5 children. In another area, 25 children. I mean, that is extraordinary. How can you not know the details of 30 children in care in a very small area?
The HSE is answerable to the Irish Minister of Health, but critics say that many of the agency's problems can be traced back to the way the government handles that responsibility.
There's a very fundamental problem here. The minister who can make the HSE respond is the Minister for Health and Children, who is, if you like, the senior minister, but all her functions have been delegated to the junior minister. So you have this bizarre situation, in my view, where a minister has total responsibility for policy and no responsibility for implementation. And that gap between policy and implementation is a fundamental part of the problem and actually seems to be growing rather than anything else.
In July, we first started asking Ireland's Minister for Children, Barry Andrews, for an interview. Our request has not been granted. The McAnaspys are also still waiting. They've challenged the current confidentiality arrangements so that Daniel's case can be discussed publicly.
Just trying to see why everything is such a secret. You know, why is it a secret? You know, we're not trying to offend anybody. You know, we're not trying to hurt anybody. You know, we just want to know why Daniel wasn't given the help he should have been deserved.
This whole confidentiality issue has been used to ensure that anyone who's made a mistake, anyone whose decisions or lack of decisions may have resulted in the death of a child isn't identified, they're never held responsible, they retain key job positions, or perhaps they're promoted to a different position.
What needs to be done with the HSE?
I believe myself that the HSE is far too big, far too diverse, has far too many problems to deal with. I think the design was bad in the first place, and if I were king for a day, I would take all of the community and social programs that the HSE operates away from the HSE.
We need, in my view, a radical overhaul of our childcare services. I think that the HSE is essentially a busted flush in dealing with children's services. The HSE has been a grossly dysfunctional agency right across the health service. It's been a disaster in the childcare area.
I think we must expect more for children in terms of service provision. We must expect more from our politicians. We must expect and we must hold our politicians accountable.
We're not here for anyone to lose their job, or we're not here to take anything from anybody. You know, we're here to ask, you know, don't let it happen again. You know, please don't let it happen again.
Sinead O'Shea reporting there. Now, we wrote to Hugh Kane, the author of the HSE letter exonerating the Director of Services at Ballydowd for her alleged involvement in the fire hose incident. We requested an interview or statement and a copy of the investigation he referred to in his letter. A spokesman for Mr Kane told us he couldn't comment. He said that Mr Kane no longer worked for the HSE and no longer had access to the inquiry report. We also wrote to the Director of Services at Ballydowd asking for a statement about the allegations made to us in this programme. She hasn't replied. On a more upbeat note, you may have noticed that Sinead O'Shea, the reporter on this film, was expecting a baby while it was being produced. Well, we're very happy to tell you that Evie, the latest addition to the O'Shea family, arrived safely last week and that she and her mother are doing just fine. That's it for this edition of People in Power. If you'd like to comment on this report or any other matter, we'd love to hear from you on aljazeera.net/English. Until next time, bye-bye.